Hi everyone, and welcome to Practical Email Deliverability. I'm Shannon Turner, a senior software engineer with ActionKit, and let's go ahead and get started. Today's agenda is maintaining an even sending volume and cadence and why that's so important, why I'm such a broken record about it. Next, we're going to talk about some other things that can affect your sender reputation, how to monitor your mailing performance, and finally, what to do when good senders like you have bad deliverability. If you've been around a while, you might remember a training that Randall and I gave back in 2022. If you have an extra hour to spare, it's still worth your time, but we've released a ton of new features and tools since then in order to help you manage your email deliverability even more. Today's presentation is covering the same topic, but I'm going to try to make this presentation you're watching now complementary rather than a rehash of the same content. So first up, I am a broken record about having even, steady sending volume. And why am I such a broken record about this? What do I mean about having steady sending volume? Well, it's really important not to suddenly send to way more people than is typical for you. And if you're going to increase how much you're sending, you'll want to do it gradually over time. A really common mistake I see is when a sender gets blocked by Microsoft, they'll stop sending to them altogether. I really don't like to see that because you do need some sending history. Sending less is great, especially if you tighten up and target to fewer people who are inactive, but stopping altogether, I don't like. So don't send to radically more people than is usual for you, and don't stop sending altogether. You want that even, steady sending volume. Why is this so important? Well, I think it's really helpful to think like a mailbox provider. So think Gmail or Microsoft or Yahoo or one of those, right? Think like a mailbox provider when you're trying to understand how to stay out of the spam box. Because if I'm a mailbox provider, my customers don't want to see spam. So my job is to put unwanted email in the spam box and everything else in the inbox. Because email delivery is more or less instantaneous, I probably don't have time to read the content of most of these emails before I deliver them, and that's not always the most reliable indicator of what's spam or not. So I need some better criteria to determine what email is spam. Now I think it's really helpful to make another conceptual jump as we think like a spammer. If I'm a spammer, my job is to send bogus email that gets you to reply or click. And almost all of the mail that a spammer sends will be correctly seen as spam. It's going to land in the spam box. Maybe it never gets delivered. And almost all of the mail that gets delivered, people will recognize it as spam and they'll delete it. So spammers have to send a lot of email in order to make any money doing it. And we've got some more problems too if we're thinking like a spammer, because legitimate platforms like ActionKit don't want you around. Those meanies won't let you send spam. So you can try to send on a legitimate platform, but that's probably not going to go super well, because as soon as they find out what you're doing, they'll shut you down pretty quickly. Maybe you can send a bunch of email really, really quickly, but that's probably not going to work for you more than once. Another way you can handle it is if you can find some insecure system out there and hack that, then you can send all the email that you want for free. But this is also risky because you're likely to be discovered. As soon as they notice, they're going to shut you down. So in order to make all of this worth the time, worth the effort, you have to send an awful lot of spam very, very quickly. But remember, spam is not just illegal content, it's unwanted email that you didn't sign up to receive. And this is very important. It doesn't matter if you like the candidate, if it doesn't matter if you support the candidate's policies. If you are on their list and you didn't sign up for it, they're spamming. Now, some platforms have a shared sender reputation, and all of the senders share a single reputation. This is how MailChimp and Patreon and Substack and many, many other platforms operate. There's nothing necessarily wrong with this. Everyone's in the same pool. And this is fine if everyone follows the rules of the pool not to spam. But on a shared reputation, there's a lot more incentive to bend the rules. Maybe you can get away with uploading names of people who didn't sign up for your email because maybe some of the other senders are not doing this, and their good behavior plus your bad behavior, maybe it all averages out in the eyes of Gmail and Microsoft and all the rest. But on ActionKit, there's nowhere to hide. You have your own reputation and no one can drag it down with them. If you upload names of people who didn't sign up to receive your email, you're going to get a lot more spam complaints and your deliverability will suffer as a result. However, if you follow best practices, nobody can drag your reputation down with them, and generally you'll have better deliverability than you would on a shared reputation service. So let's go back to thinking like a mailbox provider, because this thought experiment gave me some good ideas about how to identify spammers. Spammers send a lot of email very suddenly, and maybe I can't always trust a sender. They could have been hacked to start sending spam. It can happen, or really more commonly in our world, spammers might be a campaign who buy a big list of names that fell off the back of a truck, and they don't care too much about where these names came from. These recipients didn't opt into receiving this email, and they probably don't know the sender at all. Let's go back to imagining that we're Gmail, and this chart here is one of our senders' sending volume over the last 90 days. This has been a pretty good sender, and they've had steady, even sending volume of roughly 100,000 per day. And hey, wait a minute, what happened all of a sudden? Well, maybe the sender got hacked and they're now being used to send spam, or more commonly, maybe this sender bought 300,000 email addresses to send to. But almost certainly, these new users did not opt in to receive these emails. Maybe a more generous read would be maybe this sender tried to re-engage everyone on their list who hadn't heard from them in many, many, many months. But in either case, if we're Gmail, we definitely have to put all of these new emails into spam. Let's look at another sender who typically also sends to about 100,000 a day. This sender looks like they've started growing really steadily, starting in early March, and over the course of a couple of weeks, they've doubled their sending volume, and by the end of the month, they've roughly tripled it and then quadrupled it. In other words, this growth is spread out evenly and gradually over the last 30 days, and this is much better than the graph on this slide for sure. Let's take another example. This time the same level of growth is spread out gradually, but over 60 days instead of 30. I think this looks even better, and you're likely to see even better results. Let's take a look at another example. Here, there's been zero sending activity at this provider for a couple of months, and then all of a sudden, whoa, you're sending to 100,000 people. Now, this mailbox provider is going to say, I've never seen this sender before. They sure are sending to a lot of people. Now, they're a lot more likely to treat it like we saw on the previous slides, very skeptically, probably putting most or all of this mail into spam. What's much better is what we saw on these slides where you gradually ramp up, right? And this is called a warm-up. If you skip your warm-up, this can really hurt your long-term deliverability and sender reputation. So doing a warm-up, doing a gradual increase in your sending volume, this is incredibly important if you're starting fresh on ActionKit or if you're restarting your email program after a long absence. Let's take a look at this graph. This looks very subtly different from the last one, but I think it makes all the difference. Here, the growth in sending volume is spread out slowly and evenly over time. Not even over all that much time, honestly, right? But this is a fairly cautious growth curve. You could go even more cautious if you liked, but going cautious rather than from 0 to 100,000, this is going to ensure that you have better chances of long-term deliverability and good inbox placement. Because what the Gmails of the world will say is, I've never seen this sender before, but they're growing steadily. I think I know what happens here. They must be warming up after migrating from another platform, which definitely happens. So this feels like a really good time to call back to my presentation from earlier on 10 features every client should use. Number 7 in that list was daily send counts, and this is a recently released built-in report for Action Kit that will tell you what your sending volume is for a given mailbox provider. So you can see graphs just like we saw on the previous slides, but with your actual sending volume instead of these idealized examples. So let's take a look at some graphs. What we can do is go to Reports, go to Browse All, and then search for daily send counts by mailbox provider. This is the first graph that I showed in 10 features every client should use, which has a nice even sending volume for a couple of weeks, and then at the end of year, the sending volume basically triples overnight. Later on in February, basically no email gets sent at all, and this is going to be a problem when the sender tries to start their program back up. So I don't like to see big spikes in sending volume. I also don't like to see long periods of inactivity. By now, I think you know what I'm going to say about this one. This looks more or less fine, but we have this big sudden spike of sending volume where the sender is basically tripling their sending volume overnight. This example is a lot better. I'm not really concerned about periodic drops to 0 for the weekends or in between days, because if you were to plot a trend line, it looks basically flat. The only thing I don't like is this big volume increase at the end of December, but even that is less of a problem than some of the other examples that we've seen. This built-in report isn't just for looking at pretty charts. Here's how to make the most of it. First, use this built-in report to monitor your sending volume and get a sense of your baseline over the last 90 days. When you're onboarding users, take care not to spike your volume. And if your sending volume has spiked, take a look at your recent targeting to find out why. And if you see any long periods of inactivity, you'll want to gradually increase your sending volume to get back to your normal baseline. Having, a couple of days off for the weekend, for instance, that's not a problem. Talking about a week or two, that's going to be problematic in terms of a long period of inactivity. So why is it so important to send evenly? Well, the reason I'm such a broken record about all of this is you want to demonstrate to mailbox providers that you're legitimate. Your users have opted in to receive the email that you're sending them. And if you increase your volume too quickly, it really looks like you're sending to people who didn't opt in. Remember, these mailbox providers, they don't know who is on your list. The only way they can really tell is by looking at recent sending history to understand, has this user been on your mailing list, or did you email them out of the blue? And I understand that campaigns have pressures to fundraise and to onboard names more quickly than maybe you might want to, but I want to caution you that going too fast risks your long-term deliverability and therefore your long-term ability to connect with supporters and fundraise for very dubious, very limited short-term gain. So enough, we get it. We understand how sending volume is so important to our sender reputation. Let's move on. What else matters? What else is important? Well, sending volume, of course, isn't the only thing that affects how mailbox providers see you. It is a very big one. That's why I'm such a broken record. But there's lots of other factors too. And I think it helps to ask questions like, how do customers of mailbox providers behave when they get spam? And how do customers of mailbox providers behave when they get email that they do want? So, to understand those questions, we have to think like a person who has an email address. And that line of thinking probably goes a little something like, my inbox is full of emails that I never signed up for, aka spam. My inbox is full of emails that I rarely open, I rarely read. I maybe even tried to unsubscribe many times over the years, but they never honored my request. And I sure wish I got less email than I do. On the other hand, what are some of the ways that a recipient behaves when they get email that they actually do want? Well, maybe they like to stop and actually read some of it. Maybe their favorite senders send them content that they find interesting and relevant. Maybe they spend time reading the emails they find interesting and clicking. And they like when their mailbox provider shows them emails that they find interesting, takes them and perhaps puts them in a priority inbox. Another way of thinking about it is when I get unwanted email, I mark it as spam. I delete it without reading. I check who the sender is. Sometimes I open it. Maybe I'll get mad and I delete it right away. I'll try to unsubscribe. Usually I ignore it. I scroll past. Maybe I'll set up a filter to just delete these as soon as I get them. Maybe I'll mark this email as not important. Or I'll open it, but I don't spend any time reading it. Ugh, I'm so annoyed with the sender. Or I'll just never interact with it at all. In any of these cases, when your users are doing this, their mailbox providers, the Gmails, the Microsofts, the Yahoos of the world, they are paying attention. Now, what does it look like when we get mail that we do want? Well, I usually open it, I'll spend time reading it, I'll click on some links. I might star this email or save it for later to return to. I might even label it. I'll forward it to a friend, I'll stop scrolling past, I'll open it. I'll fish it out of the spam box and click not spam. I'll mark it as important. Maybe I'll even search for that sender or that email and I'll recognize the sender. I'll know who this is from. So I think we've answered these questions that we had from earlier. And taken all together, we can paint a fuller picture of senders in order to understand whether the Gmails of this world will put this email in the spam or the inbox. And every mailbox provider has their own formula of how they decide how much sending volume and which engagement criteria is important to them and in what levels. And they use that to determine, does this go into spam or does it go into the inbox? Does it go into the priority inbox? Does it go into promotions? That sort of thing. But you might have noticed that these pesky mailbox providers, they have a lot more information than we do. We don't really know when someone spends time reading our email. Even opens are a massive undercount, especially since Apple released their mail privacy protection program back in 2021. But of course, we remember that a lot of email clients, they don't load images by default, or maybe they won't load images from unknown senders. So opens have always been an undercount. Really, the only way that we have to track this is with opens and maybe with clicks. So we have to send emails that people actually want to receive and interact with. Importantly, doing so in the ways that we can track in order to know whether we're successful or not. So even though we can't control our users' behavior and we don't always know how much time they're spending, we do have some ways that we can ensure that we have the best chances of not annoying our supporters. And that would be sending subject lines and preview text that provide a real sense of what your mailing is about, and avoiding those misleading or gimmicky subject lines and preview text and from lines. Your from lines should be from a recognizable sender. This is really important. A recognizable sender, usually your organization's name. And you'll want to send content that your users find valuable and that they want to engage with. Avoid false urgency and sending the same types of content over and over and over and over and over again to users who are not engaging with it. So all of these here are from lines. They are real. They're from my inbox, and I hope they're not yours. But I don't like these from lines because they don't tell me anything about who the sender is. And many of these feel like they're very deliberately trying to hide who they're from. I especially don't like these ones that pretend like there's real urgency behind them, like this urgent action alert. Urgent action alert. These from lines don't tell me anything about the sender. I think they're misleading. I don't think we should use them. I'll also see this sort of thing pretty often too, this unknown sender. So let's say that I'm subscribed to the Nikema for Congress list. If I'm a voter in Georgia's 5th district, I may not necessarily know who the representative of Texas's 30th district is or why I'm getting an email from her. Even though she's a high-profile representative, I might not even open the email if I don't recognize the sender. Having this sort of guest sender thing, even with really high-profile folks, this can be really, really risky. Here's some more from that last email to illustrate more of why I think this is a problem. It's not just the from line, and I want to be super duper clear. I'm not picking on the author. I know being an email campaigner is really hard work, but I do question whether that this email here is one that a person who lives in Georgia should be getting, because it seems like it's primarily about Texas and Ted Cruz and written from Jasmine, right? I get that it's a split contribution deal. I understand why campaigns do this. You each raise a bit more, you rise together, but it's kind of hard to spot Congresswoman Nikema Williams in this email or to make the connection, right? So it makes it look like I'm on the list of some other congressperson who maybe I didn't sign up for, and so I'm a lot more likely to unsubscribe or even click spam. Here are some more guidelines. Your users should never have any doubt at all of why they're receiving email from you. It's always a good idea to vary the content that you're sending to users and keep them engaged. Give them opportunities to take positive actions, and avoid emailing users who you haven't contacted in a long time, or just as importantly, who have been ignoring your emails for a long time. And of course, never, ever, 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 ever email users who didn't sign up to get email from you. Now, I don't just want to throw tomatoes from the sidelines. I think it's also important to point out when campaigns do it right. So let's throw some roses. This call out box here was put at the top of a re-engagement email sent to users who were subscribed but hadn't received an email from this campaign in a while. I really like this call out box as a tactic because it respects the recipient. It reminds them, hey, you were subscribed before. Yes, you're right, you haven't heard from me in a while, but I'm reaching out again now. It's really important that I'm reaching out again now, but if you want to, you can click here to get fewer emails or unsubscribe altogether. I really like this as a tactic because it's going to result in much fewer spam clicks than if this box wasn't here at all. With this box, it's like, oh, right, I remember being on that list before, and oh, no problem. If I want out, here's the buttons right here. That's easy. Without this box, more people might forget that they were once subscribed to this list and then click the spam button. So I want to revisit this slide again, and I promise it's worthwhile. These are all of the things that we want users to do with our emails because they tell mailbox providers that this user loves our email. In other words, we want users to engage with our emails positively. But how? So if anyone receives newsletters through Substack, I do, and I think this is a newsletter that I think does things particularly well, both from a content and an engagement perspective. Abortion Every Day tracks all of the daily assaults on abortion rights across the US. And I want to talk through what I think newsletters like this do very well and how you can replicate these tactics in your mailings. First off, I think Substack and similar platforms in general tend to get writers and newsletters that are on very hyper-specific topics, often with audiences that are very passionate about those topics, right? So right away, that is excellent for engagement. Now imagine if you had all of your ActionKit users all tagged or categorized with their interests and issues that they care the most about, and you sent them personalized content based on what their most important issues were, right? So that's the same idea as, this kind of newsletter, right? And this link here goes to a blog post about how you can tag your pages so you can do that. But another thing, have you ever noticed all of the ways that Substack newsletters as a format are engineered for engagement? There's no reason that this sort of thing has to be limited to Substack. I think they've just managed to engineer this especially well. So as an example of some of those ways that Substack and similar platforms are engineered for engagement, look at all of these places that you're being enticed to click. So, oh, I like this piece today. I'm going to click this little heart. I want to comment. I'm going to click this little speech bubble. I want to share this. I'm going to click this here. I want to read it in the browser or in the app. I'm going to click that. So all of these things in the header are really meant to entice you to click. And that's just in the header. There's so much down below the fold once we start getting into the content that will also entice you to click. But it's not just that, it's also the content itself. This weekly feature is called One Good Thing. And I think this is so smart for a newsletter that basically every day has a lot of very frustrating content about the rollback of abortion rights and all of the monsters that are doing it. The idea here is you share one good thing that happened in your life this week, whether that's something large or small. And you can see how that's genius, right? Once a week, can you click on this email? Can you engage with it? And then as the reward, you feel part of a community where you don't feel so alone and frustrated. There's a lot of people who, have the same thoughts as you, of a similar mind, who really care about abortion and are, frustrated by all of the rollbacks, right? Here's another example. This is even from the same sender. This is another of their periodic features called the Feminist TikTok Roundup. And the subtitle is Let Me Fix Your Algorithm. And it's exactly what it sounds like. You get about a dozen different videos that all look very interesting. This one here is a Carafem care package and what comes inside of that. There's notes provided on why you should watch these videos, but you have to click in order to watch them. And you're probably going to like at least one of these videos, so you're probably going to forward this to a friend. I could spend so much time talking about what I think this particular newsletter does very well, but I'll wrap it up here. I think these emails are very long, they're very well researched, but they're also written in a conversational manner. They're very easy to read, and you feel like you're getting an email from a friend who's in the know. So I spend a lot of time reading to understand what's happening. While I'm doing that, Gmail is paying attention and knows how much time I'm spending reading this newsletter. Now, a long newsletter can also be a drawback. If I don't have time to read it, do I even bother opening? Well, these links right here can turn that weakness into a strength. I don't need to read every single story in order. I can click to skip ahead. And if I do that, then Gmail now registers that I've clicked. So either way that I'm interacting with this newsletter, whether that's taking the time to read through every article in here or just jumping straight ahead by clicking, this is being recorded as a positive engagement. Gmail and all the rest are paying attention. So I want my users to open up my emails, but that open is not going to count for much if it's followed immediately by a spam click. So if you want your users to stop scrolling and actually open your email and not click spam, you have to give them a good reason to do it. None of the advice on this slide is revolutionary, but I think it's precisely because this information is so basic that it's so important. And I especially want to encourage folks to A/B test their subject lines. This is the best way you can determine which subject lines actually work for you and for your list. You know, some reasons why A/B testing may not make sense is if your list is very small, or if you don't have a lot of people, or if you're testing too many subject lines. But I think testing about 3 or 4 subject lines is a very good idea. And if you want more information about A/B testing, there is a training that Simon ran on A/B testing that you should definitely check out, and I'll link to it in the description. Something that I've seen a lot of is emails that tell you there's not much content in this email, or this is a quick email, or it's only a few sentences long. And I don't say this to call out any senders in particular, but I personally don't like when I see emails like this, because it means that your users will not spend much time on your email if it's just a few sentences long, right? So to the mailbox providers, the Gmails, the Yahoos, all of those of the world, they're going to think, oh, this email wasn't that interesting to the user, especially if they don't click, which if it's a fundraising email, most users won't. What I like better is the approach that I've seen other senders take of much, much longer emails. You spend time reading it, and Gmail says, Shannon sure spent a lot of time reading that email. This sender must be really important to her. She didn't just go make a coffee and leave her email open. She's scrolling too, because of course Gmail and all the rest, they're tracking that. Remember all of the tricks that we saw from Substack and similar blogging platforms, but next time you get an email from them, take the time to look through and notice every little button, every little special link that's meant to juice clicks. These aren't just in the header. There's a lot of reasons for that. Some of this is so that they can get you on their website or their app where they can better track what you're doing. Some of that is to send positive signals to Gmail and all the rest that they should deliver this email to your inbox and not to spam. You might notice that also a lot of the emails from Substack and similar tend to be pretty long, right? People are spending a lot of time reading their email, right? This is something I'm interested in. I'm going to spend the time to read it. Emails from the Bernie Sanders team tend to be really, really long with a lot of compelling content. You've got a clear, connected ask. This email, this is a fundraiser, but you got to scroll way, way, way down here. in order to find that donate button. And if you do take the time to read this, you're bought in first, right? So that really matters. Here's a concrete example from something I was talking about earlier with the subject line, "This email is one sentence long, seriously." I understand why campaigns do this. The train of thought is, we know your inbox is crowded. We know everyone's vying for your time and your attention and your money. We'll be really brief so you can go back to your life. But most people don't donate. So emails like this give very few opportunities for people to engage. So even though I really like this candidate, I really don't like this email. I think it's unlikely to get a lot of clicks. If people do open it, Gmail and all the rest will see that this person did not spend much time reading the email. They opened, they closed, they moved on. So from a mailbox provider's perspective, does this user who received this email, do they like getting emails from this sender? Should they prioritize emails from this sender in the future? Probably not. I also think sender recognition is extremely important for users. Just like you have a sender reputation with mailbox providers that determine how likely they are to put you in spam or the inbox, your users have a mental model of who their trusted senders are. So, who are the people and the organizations that they want to receive email from? Because if I don't recognize the sender, I am much more likely to skip past or click spam. And something I really see often that I really dislike is gimmicks like putting the user's name or email address into the from line. That's really, really misleading. And Gmail also recently started enforcing rules against it, so we in turn started warning you not to do it. Forwards are assigned to mailbox providers that an email is interesting enough to be worth sharing. So make sure that you're sending users content that they might want to forward to someone else. For example, users are typically trained not to forward fundraisers, especially if it might pre-fill their personal info. So is there other types of content that you can send your users that they might want to forward or might think is interesting to send to someone else? And on the subject of fundraisers, I see a lot of senders only sending fundraisers and no other content, and I really don't like to see this. Your users hate being treated like an ATM. Donor fatigue is real, and there's a lot of skepticism of that 500% match. And unfortunately, a lot of that skepticism, I think, is founded. Also, a lot of users aren't really in a position to give right now, or maybe they were, but they're not anymore. And being constantly reminded of that with a barrage of fundraising emails makes people tune out. Is there another way that people could get involved? Could they donate their time? Could they donate their talent? Can they get involved with volunteering, phone banking, knocking doors, canvassing, anything like that? Can you give them some other way to get involved? So, we've talked about why it's so important to have an even sending volume. We've talked about all of the different ways that we can improve our metrics with users and improve engagement, those positive engagement signals, and lowering the negative engagement signals, things like, clicking spam. But now let's take a look at how to monitor our mailing performance. I'm guessing most people have seen the mailing report screen, but if you're brand new to ActionKit, this is where you'll see how well your mailing performed: opens, clicks, actions, total opens, unsubscribes, bounces, all of that. I also want to cover or at least point out the compare to others. This is the compare mailings report. as well as the bounce delay metric screen, which we'll cover in a few slides. Now, we used to show you just opens divided up by the mailbox provider, and that can be super helpful to understand in fine detail how your mailing performed. Because remember, every mailbox provider handles traffic to their users a little differently. We talked about how different mailbox providers have their own formulas for how they decide what's spam and what gets delivered to the mailbox, the inbox, right? And since each mailbox provider has their own formula, it can really help to see how that gets applied in the form of opens and clicks and actions and so on, right? If you're not getting any opens, you're probably getting delivered to spam, for instance. Now, we used to just show those opens by mailbox provider. Now we also show you clicks, actions, unsubscribes, and unsubscribes by ISP or spam clicks. So we show you a lot more data than before. But let's go through each mailbox provider to see what accounts for differences between them, because this table here is probably just as important as the overall performance that we saw here. So first we can see that opens are low for Apple as compared to other mailbox providers. This is not surprising because we remember, and I've been a broken record about this, that users with Apple domains are overrepresented among enrollees of Apple's mail privacy protection, and this means that we cannot track opens for most Apple users. Secondly, I think there's a big problem with deliverability at Microsoft addresses here because 0 opens, 0 clicks, even 0 unsubscribes, that seems really unlikely, even though it only went to a few hundred people. We see Proofpoint it went to fewer and we still got some opens, right? So at a glance, I suspect that most of these emails went to the spam folder. Why does Gmail have so few clicks compared to other mailbox providers? Typically, this is because Gmail is being sent to so many more users than other providers, and it's extremely uncommon to have these super high click rates as your volume increases. So while this looks like a major difference between click rates, I'm actually not really concerned about it. This is reverting to the mean, reverting to the average, right? And we haven't even looked at the targeting criteria for this email. Maybe this is targeted to more active users at Comcast. That's pretty common. Comcast is a really strict provider. Maybe what happened here is we have to target to a smaller group at Comcast. Maybe we have to target to those 30-day openers and clickers at Comcast, but we can target to 90-day at Gmail, for example. This unsubscribed by ISP or spam click column is interesting, but we also have to be careful not to draw the wrong conclusions. Neither Gmail nor Apple share spam click data with us. So for Gmail, these are all clicks to that unsubscribe link at the very top of each email. None of these are spam clicks for Gmail. Gmail makes it very easy to unsubscribe in this way, and the link is actually very prominent. So I'm not concerned about this level of unsubscribes. These are not actual spam clicks for Gmail or for Apple. And now that we've seen the performance by mailbox provider for this mailing, I want to talk about the bounce delay metrics screen. There's actually a couple of different ways to get to this screen, either on the mailing report screen, as we saw up here, or on the mailings tab if you see this little bounce delays alert. You may also see the bounce delay metrics link highlighted in red and with a little warning icon like this. But before we start analyzing this chart, let's take a look at how do we read it first. This highlighted section is going to show how many people at these mailbox providers received this mailing. So 166,000 people received this at Gmail, 75,000 people received it at VMG or Yahoo, AOL, and so on. So in other words, these two mailbox providers account for 80% of the email recipients in this mailing. Percentage delivered tells us how many successful deliveries we had compared to how many we sent. We want as close to 100% as possible. And already we can see VMG and Proofpoint looking a little anemic here. So bounces is the same measure, but with the absolute numbers rather than the proportion. Percentage of provider tells us how many of the emails at that provider bounced. So we can see that it's kind of like the inverse of the delivered, right? We can see that almost all of the emails at VMG bounced, almost none of them at Gmail bounced, right? So this is kind of a repetitive thing, but it's actually really helpful because it helps us to understand the problem from multiple perspectives. Here it's really clear to see that, almost all of the email at VMG bounced, and it was a quarter of our mailing. So a quarter of our mailing just was not delivered. The delays section works exactly the same as the bounces. Here we can see what proportion of this provider was delayed and what proportion of the mailing was affected. So again, almost all of our email at VMG was delayed. That was a quarter of our mailing. Almost all of our mailing to Proofpoint was delayed, but it was a very small proportion of the overall sends. This went to like 1,800 people, but that's kind of small potatoes compared to the rest of the list. So to recap, if you wrote into support and you asked me to look at this mailing, these are the two sections that I would highlight as being problematic. These are the things to look for. Now, hard bounces are the ones that you're most familiar with. These are the email addresses that are permanently undeliverable. You'll see these on the mailing report screen. They are permanently undeliverable because the email address is bad. If your cat walks across the keyboard and then you add @gmail.com to it, you're going to get a hard bounce because there's no account associated with that email address. The mailbox provider, Gmail in this case, tells us we don't have that user. That's a hard bounce, and if you get too many of them, that's going to hurt your sender reputation because the Gmails of the world will say, this isn't a real user. This person didn't sign up for your list. Where did you get this name? We always automatically unsubscribe hard bounces. We always have, always will, because a hard bounce is permanently unsubscribed or permanently undeliverable. And if you were signed up for Scorepool, and you should be because it was one of 2025's 10 features every client should use, we can unsubscribe a user who hard bounced at another ActionKit client, which means that you'll have fewer hard bounces and as a result, fewer hits to your sender reputation. Soft bounces, on the other hand, these are relatively new to being recorded in ActionKit ever since we added the bounce delay report screen. Soft bounces are bounces that are temporarily undeliverable. The most common case here is when a user's mailbox is full. And if a user's mailbox is constantly full because they're no longer checking their email address, we have a way to detect that and unsubscribe them. So check out this link for more details. It'll go to another of last year's 10 features every client should use. Other soft bounces include autoresponders and having your mail temporarily delayed. You might also be blocked by a given mailbox provider, and that's also going to show up as a bounce on the bounce delay screen as well. So if we scroll down towards the bottom of the bounce delay metrics screen, we can see that the problem was our sending IP was temporarily suspended by Verizon, Yahoo, and AOL. So basically all of the emails that we sent to these domains didn't get through. And if this happens once and never again, then probably there's not an issue here. Maybe you had a targeting a mistake, lesson learned. But if this happens regularly and your mail continues to not get delivered at Yahoo, AOL, and so on, if you continue to get this message, then you have to reach out to ActionKit support and let us know. We will get you unblocked. If we scroll down a little bit more, this is the last thing on the bounce delay metric screen. Here we can see that these emails were first delayed due to unexpected volume or user complaints. And that's actually really, really important. Unexpected volume or user complaints. Typically, that's because your sending volume increased drastically, or you got a lot more spam complaints than usual, or more commonly, both of those things. And a lot of times what'll happen is Yahoo or AOL will receive a lot more email from you than usual. So let's visualize this. Let's pretend that this chart is what Verizon's looking at their headquarters. It's your sending volume for your email on the last few slides. You have a nice, fairly even sending volume over the last several months. That looks great. And then all of a sudden, your sending volume is abnormally high today. What's going on? They're going to delay these emails because they're skeptical of it. They're asking themselves, are these real opt-ins? Or did you buy a bunch of names that didn't actually opt in? So they're going to delay these emails to see how this group reacts. Do they click spam? Do they engage positively? If your email got a lot of spam complaints, which it probably did if you increased your volume by this much, so you're likely to see that message from this last slide, temporarily deferred due to unexpected volume or user complaints. And that could lead to your sending IP getting temporarily suspended, at which point none of your email is going to go through. So although the chart on the last slide makes for a really nice visualization, in almost every single case that we see coming into support, this is almost never due to a single mailing. Typically what happens is you'll first see some elevated delays. If you don't notice that, you continue sending way more volume or getting way more spam complaints. Those delays turn into bounces, and if you ignore those bounces or you don't see them, those will eventually turn into spam blocks. So what I really want you to take away from all of this is to notice the bounce delay metric screen, click on it, and learn how to read the chart so you can notice small problems before they turn into big ones. And another great way to notice small problems before they become big ones is to look at the daily open rate by mailbox provider report. The mailing performance screens that we've seen in this section so far have all been really helpful for seeing how a single mailing performs on its own. You can see the opens and clicks and bounces and delays for one specific mailing. That's really helpful, especially if something changes dramatically or you get results that's way worse than you expect. It might be due to some targeting mistake only affecting that specific mailing, for example. But another really great tool in your toolbox is looking at your mailings in aggregate. And that's what this daily open rate by mailbox provider is meant to accomplish. So here you'll see performance not just for a single mailing, but for all of your mailings over the last 2 weeks, by day, and by mailbox provider. Let's zoom in on this report to understand how to read it a little bit better. This top number in each cell, this is how many emails were sent to addresses at this mailbox provider on this date. So for Comcast on March 25th, that's roughly 1,400 people. The bottom number is the open rate for all of those emails. So for Comcast on March 25th, that's 20% of those 1,400 who opened. Is 20% good? Well, to be sure, we have to compare it to other days that had similar volume. It's also worth mentioning that when the sending volume is very low, we can't draw any meaningful conclusions from the result. This here is kind of an ideal example. There's no actual difference between an open rate of 0% and an open rate of 100% because they both went to a single person. Here in the middle, this has no data, it went to nobody. Some of these table cells are highlighted, and when you see these, pay closer attention to these than you might otherwise, because this is a sign that performance for this provider was significantly worse than your average. So it's worth investigating further to find out why. So even though these have such lower sending volume than usual, the performance here is really low. It's worth paying attention to. And here's what these colors mean statistically. So here, this one, the lightest, is 75% of your mailings have better open rates. This yellow warning here, about 85%. And if you see this, then you know that 95% of your mailings have better open rates. To properly read the daily open rate by mailbox provider report, we need to look for outliers across mailbox providers and across days. Since this is open rates right away, you know what I'm going to say here. Apple will always have very low open rates because of Apple's mail privacy protection. Not every user with an Apple email address is enrolled, and of course, other mailbox providers can be enrolled too, but Apple has disproportionately more enrollees than Gmail does, for example. So I'm not at all surprised to see low open rates at Apple. Sometimes grouping these results by day and looking at the broader context lets us see connections that are harder to see otherwise. So here we can see that open rates really fell apart across a lot of different mailbox providers starting on March 27th and didn't really recover until March 31st. Look how Charter went from 22% to 0%, Comcast from 22 to 2%, Gmail from 21 to 13. Well, Microsoft's always been low here. Office 365, well, we can't actually determine this because it went to so few people, but other from 28 to 10%, Proofpoint from 29 to 0%, and VMG from 18 to 4%, right? So we're seeing performance for so many mailbox providers plummet all at once. I suspect that this is a targeting problem. Maybe some group of inactives was mistakenly included during this period. Now, some of these are weekend days. That's also true for April 5th here. But because the sending volume for these dates is really, really low, we can probably rule out that this went to a wider distribution than usual. If anything, this was sent to a very small, very inactive list. So, for example, this also looks like these send counts were unusually low compared to the other dates. So we can see here that Gmail, we have like 22,000 here, 48 or 49,000 here, down to less than 500 for these 4 dates. VMG was at 10,000, 16,000, and then again, less than 500. And if you open up the daily send counts report that we talked about in the previous section, this would be even more obvious. So I think, the weekends here, these were on the 28th, the 29th, and the 5th, but the volume is abnormally low for a weekday on the 27th and the 30th. I don't think this is end of quarter fatigue going on here. Why was the volume so low on these dates? And unfortunately, this report will not give you the answers to what was the original cause of a problem. But if you become skilled at reading this report, you'll understand which questions are worth further pursuit. So if you were this fictional example client and you wrote into support asking for deliverability help, here's what I'd notice from this chart. Performance is a lot lower than usual between March 27th and March 30th, as well as on April 5th. And at the same time, these are also the days with the lowest volume. So my operating theory here is that these days did not have a mailing that got sent to the full list. So I'm guessing that the only sends that went out to these days were to a re-engagement list or something similar, and those tend to have really, really weak performance. And that would be the first thing that I would check for based on this chart. Another thing that I find concerning is that the open rates are steadily at 0 for Microsoft during this entire period. So this looks to me like this sender is being spam boxed at Microsoft. And I'd look for elevated bounces or delays there as well. Now, I suspect on the bounce delay metric screen of any given mailing for this client, we'd see a block at Microsoft. So if you wrote into support and asked me about this chart, I'd check to see if you were blocked at Microsoft, and then I'd try to get you unblocked. I'd also probably advise you on changing your re-engagement series. Next up, I want to mention that third-party tools like Google Postmaster can be really, really useful. I'm not going to do Google's job and do a full training on Google Postmaster tools, but I do want to point out a few really useful screens. This is the old version of Google Postmaster tools, and if your screen looks a little something like that, you can click here the Google Postmaster tools, and it'll say there's a little banner that says here you can find the new version. What I want to show you is over time the spam complaint rate for your sends. Remember that Google does not report spam complaints directly to us or to anybody. So it's really important to check directly from them in order to make sure that you're taking care of your sender reputation. Here's the old style IP reputation screen, which is going to show you how well Google thinks of your sending IP over time, ranging from bad to high. Almost all ActionKit clients have a single sending IP, but some very large clients may have more than one. And if you're on a shared sending IP service like MailChimp or similar, then that's going to show up under a different sending IP and subdomain. That's not going to be reflected in the same traffic as mixed with ActionKit. You may have your own tab for that, or you may have multiple IPs that show up here. And if you're wondering what the gaps are in this chart here, these are the days that I didn't send very much to Gmail addresses. That's typically 1,000 emails or fewer on that day. And Gmail uses GMT for all of these dates, so just a heads up. Here's the old style domain reputation, which is pretty similar to your sending IP reputation. Here also, it's from bad to high. And these same caveats apply if you're sending from services other than ActionKit. You may have to choose a different domain to find them. This is the new style spam rate report, and here you can see the recommended threshold that Google wants you to stay below, and that's 0.1%. Getting more spam complaints than this is likely to cause deliverability problems for you. If you ever reach 0.3%, you're likely to have major problems with being put in spam, so you'll want to avoid ever reaching 0.3% shown in red. There are more tools available here and some nuance to these reports, but these are probably the most important screens to look at, especially if you're just starting out. And one really important thing I want to remind everyone is if you haven't sent very much email to Gmail addresses, then you won't have any spam or reputation data to search in Gmail for those days. So if you see no data, you probably didn't send any mail. Next up is what to do when we have bad deliverability. because one day this table that we saw earlier might be you, or maybe this table from earlier will be you. Either way, we are here to help. Reach out to Action Kit support and we will give you some guidelines on what you can do to get out of trouble. When you reach out, the advice that we give you will usually be some flavor of target to your best, most active, most engaged users. Send less volume, especially less risky volume, which is typically re-engagement or people who are less engaged. Send your best, most engaging content. Fundraisers are typically not that. Fundraisers tend to get a much lower engagement rates than surveys or social content, that sort of stuff. You may also want to pause re-engagement. And don't stop sending entirely, even if you're blocked. All of these you're doing, remember to show mailbox providers, the Gmails, the Yahoos of the world, that we are sending to users who love getting our mail and love to engage with it. We have to do all of those things on that last slide because this is what we want to happen all of the time, right? But especially during an email warm-up or just after we start having deliverability trouble. We want users to love the email we send them so they open, they read, they click, and they engage positively. The mailbox providers like Gmails of the world, they notice that. They see all of those positive signals of engagement and they deliver the email that we send them to the inbox, not to spam, where users continue to see it and they love it and they engage positively, and it's a virtuous cycle. This is the exact same feedback loop, but in the wrong direction. Users don't like my email or they don't see it, so they ignore it, or they don't recognize the sender, so they don't engage positively, or maybe they even engage negatively. And the Gmails and the Microsofts and the Yahoos of the world, they notice that low positive engagement, they notice that high negative engagement. Maybe they deliver my email straight to spam or not at all, and no one sees my email, they ignore it, and it keeps getting worse. So practically, here are some tactics that can help you see better results. But I really want to emphasize that you can't forget the strategy from earlier sections, because you can't tactics your way out of bad strategy forever. So make sure that you're only sending to users who have opted in. If a user hasn't opened or clicked or otherwise engaged with your email in 180 days, let them go, unsubscribe them. Maybe you try to re-engage them once, maybe twice, but let them go after that. Consider an activity screen like 30-day openers, 60-day clickers. I think that's quite nice. And really, really important, vary your content. Don't just send only fundraisers. You can re-engage your users, but it's very risky. They have not engaged with your email for some reason. If you do this, you're more likely to get spam complaints, especially if they don't remember signing up for your list or if they thought they were already unsubscribed. So especially if you're doing re-engagement, you may want to remind users right up top, yeah, you haven't heard from me in a while, but I'm reaching out now because it's really important. And if you're growing, if you're emailing users who are new to list, this is a bit riskier. You don't have activity data like opens and clicks for those users. You're also a lot more likely to get spam complaints, especially if they don't remember signing up for your list. That can happen, especially if it's been a while since they actually opted in versus when they started getting email from you. So when you onboard new users, you want to do it gradually. And this is especially important during a warm-up. Now, if I had infinite time in this presentation, I would talk about everything linked here in this comprehensive guide to deliverability and inbox placement. This has a ton of really helpful information. This is meant to be a resource for you to understand all of this and how you can apply all of these principles really, really practically. This is linked here. I'll put it in the description. And that is the practical email deliverability. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you, you know, go here to get the rest of the slides and the rest of the presentations. Thank you, everyone, and I'll see you in another training.